and welcome to session number 15. I've got to make a little statement here, and that is about how the course is presented, because we're trying to provide here a lot of information about different things, different subjects that are related but not always entirely 100%. Like even when you go to university and you want to study to become an agronomist, you'll take separate courses, separate subjects. So you'll take a course, let's say, in plant pathology, i.e. diseases, a course in soil science, a soil in entomology, like insect science, etc. And then at the end, you integrate all of this information. And to make things even a little bit more complex for us here, we're introducing this factor of human nutrition, which is not something that's covered in agricultural schools. So bear with me, please, because we're not doing this necessarily in a manner that is going to be totally sequential in such, but you will be able to integrate all of this information later on and refer to it for your future reference, because each session really is somehow independent from others. So you can look back at them and study them individually should you want to. So today I felt that we need to put the brakes on a little bit and talk about plant classification, because it's something of importance later on, as we shall see. Plant classification is a very complex science, actually, and it can be very boring. When I was at uni, I had a maverick of a professor, and he taught it in such a way that was extremely pleasant, and I'm forever thankful to him. And plants in general are classified in accordance to either their features, their physiological cycle, etc., etc. But there are major classifications that are based on whether or not they produce seeds. Okay, now seedless plants, we really don't need to worry about them much, because most of them are, not, like of nutritional value, perhaps with the exception of mushrooms. And it is those seeded plants are the ones that we really grow, well, primarily, again, apart from mushrooms, and we need to sort of know a little bit about. And again, in their turn, those seeded plants are in two major categories: non-flowering and flowering. The non-flowering ones are referred to as the gymnosperms, and these are like pines, cedars, this kind of thing. And the flowering ones are referred to as the angiosperms. Now, the angiosperms are again subdivided into two major classifications: the monocotyledonous or the dicotyledonous. Now, what does that mean? I jumped the gun here a little bit and started to talk about these, but that's fine. The monocotyledonous plants are referred to as monocots in brief, and the dicotyledonous plants are referred to as the dicots. So these are the major classifications once again: ferns, mosses, gymnosperms, angiosperms, which are flowering plants, and they are either monocotyledonous or dicotyledonous. Now, it's really important for us to be able to know the difference between a monocot and a dicot. When we look at it, we should know the difference. And there are basic telltale signs that we can be looking out for. Now, why is this important? From the nutritional point of view, those different categories will, accumulate different nutrients. And we want to do things like weed control, even if you don't want to use fungicides, even if you want to use benign fungicides, which we will be talking about later on. It's also important to know the difference. And that's why, you get a weedicide that says for broadleaf, another one for grasses. Now, broadleaf is another term for dicot. Grasses is another term for monocot. Okay? But if you look at the major features that distinguish monocots from dicots, then you don't really need to look at, those things that you will find on the label of a product, whatever it is, to let you know whether you are dealing with a monocot or a dicot. Now, these are some of the differences. But if you know all of these differences, they should be really enough for you to be able to distinguish a monocot from a dicot. So let's talk about them one by one. The difference that gave these two different groups of plants their name is the number of compartments in the seed. So mono is 1, di is 2. A monocot seed has 1 compartment, and the dicot seed has 2. Now, if you take a bean seed, a dry bean seed, you soak it in water until it's really very soft, and you squish it, it will split into 2. You know, we use the term split peas. Why? Because a pea is a dicot, and you can split the seed into 2, and split pea is a commonly used term. It's not a botanical term, but it's really referring to the fact that this seed can be split into 2. But you cannot split a corn. You can pop a corn, you can make popcorn, but you're not going to be able to split the seed because the seed is made of 1 compartment. Okay? Now we will go back to these things later on, but that's the basic feature between monocots and dicots. 1 compartment, 2 compartments. Okay? The other thing is about the shape of the leaf. And this can be a little bit confusing here, because monocot leaves have parallel veins and dicot leaves have a midrib. Okay, now I have here with me a citrus leaf. I'm sure you're all familiar with citrus leaf. Now, a citrus leaf has a true midrib in the middle. You can see it. And then on the side, you have those veins. Okay, so that's a typical dicot leaf, a simple dicot leaf. When I say simple, it means it's not a compound leaf, because some leaves have leaflets. You know, like if you look at a rose leaf, it normally is comprised of 5 little leaflets, but each one of these has this shape. So we say that dicot leaves don't have a midrib. Now someone might say, what about bananas? Ooh, look at that. Look at that. That looks like a huge midrib, but in fact it's not. It's not. These are all parts of the stem, actually, and the parallel venation that we're talking about in monocots, because banana is a monocot, is actually here, and you can see it very easily. It's if you break that. These are the veins. I'm breaking along the veins. You know, you cannot do this with something like a citrus leaf. You can't do it. So banana is a monocot, even though the leaf, you know, at first glance, it may look like the leaf of a dicot, but actually it is not. It's a monocot. But that's not a typical, I must say, it's not a typical monocot leaf. The typical monocot leaf is that of a blade of a grass. And if you look at it up close, you can see that the veins are actually parallel to each other. I'll have a close-up of this and attach it to the presentation at the end of it. So don't worry about not being able to see it very clearly for now. Okay, so in general then, those different features are easily visible, but sometimes they are not. You have to be a little bit tricky with finding out whether it's really parallel venation or whether you have a midrib or not. Okay. The second major feature between monocots and the dicot is the morphology of the root, because a monocot normally has a fibrous root system, and again a dicot normally has a tap root system. Now this may look like a trivial difference, but in fact it's not, because the tap root system is able to go deeper. The fibrous root often doesn't. So this will play a big role in the ability of this plant to draw nutrients from the soil, right? It makes sense, makes big sense. And even when you look at the huge trees that are monocots, and you know, when you think of monocot trees, the biggest ones are those of dates. Whether it's an edible form of date or whether it's an ornamental date, it's still a monocot. And if you uproot one of these things, which is very difficult to do, by the way, you know, we often talk about that, like wind. In the case of big wind, Why is it that some trees break and others don't? Because if you have a taproot, you have a main stem. And when the wind takes the tree down, that taproot will break and away goes the whole tree. In the case of monocot, you don't have that. You have a fibrous root. It may not go deep down inside, but because it's all over the place, spread all over the place. So when a tree bends and some root system gets sort of like, say, threatened with the wind, there's other parts of that root system which hold it together. And that's why you can see, you know, those vines, you know, in places like Hawaii, even in Australia, actually, you see them almost parallel, you know, growing to the ocean, and they don't break. Okay, so that's another big important feature. Okay, another one is the rings on the stem. Now, here's the thing. Monocots, a lot of them are annual, most of them. But those that are perennial, like palms, they don't grow much. Well, they will, but they're not going to grow much in width of stem. This is why when you look at a palm, you see the stem going like this. It's not like, let's say, in the case of an orange tree or an apple tree or anything like that is of dicot background. You see that the bottom is very thick and then it tapers off as it goes up. Why does this happen in dicots? Is because every year you have a new layer of cells forming, and these are what's known as the annual rings. So when you cut the stem of a dicot tree, you can count those rings and get an idea about how old is that tree, because every ring refers to a year in age. I'm not going to talk about why this happens, but basically you have the position of wood material to the inside always, every year, in the form of rings. And the deposition at the outside peels off, and that's what we call the bark. Or botanically, it's called the phloem. The one that goes inside is the xylem. But in the case of monocots, those two things are mixed together. You don't have the position of rings on an annual basis, okay? So you can't go and cut the ring, the stem of a monocot tree, you know, of a palm to see how old it is. It won't give you this information. And in the flower itself, in the monocot, you have 3 or 6. In the dicots, you have 4 or 5. Now, someone might say, well, what about roses? A rose will have 20 leaves, 20 petals. Yes, true. But if you really count them, you will find that there are multiples of 4 or 5, most of the time. In the case of monocots, they're always 3 or 6, always. That's why when you look at daffodils, onions, garlic, all of these are monocots. Now, how many petals will you find in a daffodil? How many petals will you find in a gladiolus? If you can't remember what it looks like, go Google it. Iris, all of these things, they only have 3 or 6. In the case of dicots, you'll have 4 or 5, or multiples of. Now, these are the main features, main differences. There are many others, okay? There are many others. But when you look at a plant, and you can see that it has thrown a flower that's got only 3 petals, and you say, well, that's the first indication that it's telling me that it is a monocot. Are there any other features that I can look for? Then you look for, you know, parallel venation. You look at a seed, if you can find it. If you can find one of these differences, normally it doesn't really tell you the whole picture, except that if you find actually the seed, and you can split it in half, or you can't split it in half. But when you find 3, 4 of them, then you can assuredly say that this is really a dicot or a monocot. Okay, now examples of monocot crops that we eat: bananas, onions, garlic, dates. These are the things that come to my mind off the top of my head. There are many other ornamentals, you know, daffodils, all of the lilies actually, all of the lily families, they're all monocots. Examples of dicots, well, virtually everything else. Apples, oranges, macadamias, all of the nuts, all of the beans, they're all dicots, most of them. So when it comes to actually, growing plants, most of our crops, most of them are dicots, and the other half or third perhaps is monocots. Cereals, we talk about cereals, they're mostly monocots, most of them, if not all of them. Actually all of them. I might have done a tiny mistake here. I can't think of a cereal that's a dicot unless it's given a misnomer. Rice, barley, sorghum, wheat, they're all monocots. I didn't include them in the list I gave before. But all of the other major crops, especially fruits, except bananas, they are dicots. Something to think about and brew about, and if you have any questions, please ask. Don't hesitate to ask. Well, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.